So I wanted to talk to you about this because of something you said one time about you used the phrase prominent family. I'm from a prominent family.
Oh, sure.
I'm really interested in that because well, just tell me what you meant by that.
Well, I think when I said that, we were talking about something related to astrology and how there can be things in the chart that point to kind of eminence factors and stuff like this, but it's about situating those things in a context. So I have um the sun in Leo in the 10th house, and I read somewhere one time it's like the firstborn son of like a prominent family. And I am not, like a Kennedy or a Rockefeller or something like this, but I am
Mhm.
um, Daniel Mann Norman III from Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Uh-huh.
And where I'm from, my family is quite prominent. There's I mean, we're not like super wealthy or anything like this, but in the Black community in Fayetteville, I want to say the biggest church in town is called Lewis Chapel Baptist Church. And my grandparents started going to that church when it was a tiny little one room kind of church house in the, I want to say this is like 1973, 1975, something like this. And now it is this
Mhm.
massive thing. And because my grandparents have been members since the very beginning, my grandfather is a deacon. They also had, five kids, and their children were very popular. So just around Fayetteville, even when I haven't been home in a while and I tell someone my name, everyone kind of stops and they're like, "Huh, you're
Uh-huh.
Deacon Norman's grandson? Huh, is Dan Norman's your father?" And yeah, it's a weird thing. There are things that are nice about it, and there are things that are strange about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason that jumped out to me so much is because the contexts are slightly different, but like I have a similar background. I'm one
Mm,
more generation removed from it than you are. My father is the one who is really in your position as far as the family goes. But like
sure.
uh, being from a prominent minority family in a small southern town
Yeah,
like is a remarkable thing and well, that's given rise to a lot of really interesting conversations between the two of us about the similarities and differences
yeah,
in where we're coming from. But one of the most important similarities, I think, is that we both have families of our own now,
yeah.
and like forgive me if I'm speaking for you too much, but I feel like another similarity is that we aren't raising our families uh, the way we were raised per se.
Yeah, 150%. And that's hmm. And that's funny. It's like I mean, well, one thing is like I'm on the other coast from my family. All my family's back in North Carolina, and I'm out here in California. And my family, particularly the Normans, were not happy about my moving to California.
Uh-huh.
They were very much against it up until like a couple of days before I left. Like they were not feeling it. And so yeah, I've definitely felt not just doing it differently in a, part of it is, I don't know, it feels sort of, there's a mixture of rebellion and there's also a mixture of like rejection,
Uh-huh.
um that is that is hard to reconcile. And then now, as as we're doing the family thing, as the kids are getting older, all of a sudden, like people always say, it's like the voice of my father, the voice of my grandfather, the
Uh-huh.
voice of my grandmother, they're all coming out of me as I'm talking to the kids,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
like
yeah.
trying to do it differently, but there's also an extent to which, you know maybe I can't, or maybe I shouldn't. I wonder how much, you know When I think about like ancestors, um, and I think about, the way that, certain familial patterns will repeat themselves, and I see myself, living some of those out. But then, perhaps there are also some of those things that are good, or at least like innate. Like maybe there is something about the way that I'm raising my kids that is just like the way that my people raise kids,
Uh-huh.
in a sense, because a lot of it is instinctual. um but I don't know.
I completely relate to the level of like assurance, or like there's this feeling of instinct what that feels reassuring, having something to do with that, the people,
Yeah.
the like way it's been done, and the sort of unconscious layers of preparation that are there.
Right.
But I also uh both of us like do some work, some spiritual work to actively contact those ancestors and try and learn things from them. And I feel like kind of clumsy at that effort, but I have been doing it for a long time, and I have sort of gathered a lot from it. One of the things that it's become a two-way conversation also for me, that like I'm doing things quite differently in certain ways, and like telling them that has been important for me, and sort of freeing myself to do what I do as a parent, and as a member of a family and a community. I would love to hear how the conversation goes on your end, and whether there's any of that two-way communication, and what you have to say to your own ancestors.
It can be, there is a bit of a two-way communication. I think that there is something about, hmm I think that that my, kind of immediate ancestors, when I think of like the last like 100 or 200 or so years, like it's all pretty, kind of rural, and agrarian, um you know um slaves and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
um, um, and so there is, I think that there is a certain amount of, um, how do you say? There I feel like what I get from them, or what I'm, you know, trying to learn from them, or trying to kind of tap into, is that sense of having a strong kind of home base upon which, lots of different things can grow. You know what I mean? Looking, but doing like that kind of, genealogical research, and realizing that people are having, they're 12, 13, 14 kids. And so this idea of cultivating a space that can sustain, um you know, disparate interests, people kind of doing different things, is a thing that makes sense to me. And the kind of role of the patriarch in that, to be, kind of, um, solid, and to an extent unchangeable,
Hmm.
or unchanging, you know what I mean, is a thing that I have wrestled with pretty much my whole life, but especially in being a parent. I think the thing that I run up against quite often is, my innate desire to kind of go and do, whatever, whenever, and the very strong pull, and not just responsibility, but almost a kind of like purpose of, that of kind of not being in the background, but being, the rock upon which things are built. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Um, and then the ways that the ways that I don't do that, is that I'm not particularly prescriptive and I don't, you know, plan to be as my kids get older about what this foundation for them is for. You know
Uh-huh.
what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Because you know the thing that I got from my own family, and even with the, you know, mystical, magical, you know, things I do, even with my ancestors, the two-way conversation I get from them is like, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this,"
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and and I'm sort of like, well, you know, this is how we get to talk. This is how you get to communicate. This
Yeah.
is how you get to be with the kids, which I can tell that they like, you know,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. It's just like, hey, well, if you want to be a part of this, then it's going to get a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that has been, um, fine, fine. I haven't run into anything too tricky yet.
Uh-huh. That, I mean, that is exactly the substance of the sort of disagreements that I've had with my own ancestors in ceremony. Is like, what are you doing? Like how are you even doing this? And like having to explain that, like, this is how we're going to do it. This is how we're going to make the repair.
Yeah.
I want to know if that concept of repair resonates with you, because it's this critical Jewish concept that I'm always playing with. Is like, is that our job as the latest in a long line to do a repair?
Yeah. I think that, you know, there's definitely a thing there of, well, you know, like I was saying before about having, you know, kind of old family patterns showing up. And I think that a thing that I've gotten um in my own life, and I don't mind talking about it a little bit. You know, I have my oldest son is from a different relationship, and then I have my younger daughters are from my relationship with my wife, and my relationship with my son's mother is, you know, quite contentious. And the thing that I have, you know, come to understand is that a certain amount of, you know, distance and estrangement between um fathers and their firstborn sons is kind
Mm,
of a thing
mm,
that that plays out. Firstborn children, honestly, is a thing that seems to have played out quite a lot in my family. I can see it in a lot of different places just with the family members that I'm aware of, but then also, you know, in that communication with the ancestors, figuring out that this is a thing.
mhm,
Um, and um, and that is something that I've been working really hard to understand, and also working really hard to um, heal. And I think what can be very challenging about that is part of healing it is is having to deal with it yourself. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
you don't only heal it by kind of healing it and then it's just like, okay, and now I don't have to bother with any of
Mhm,
this. You know what I mean? So there's a part of it that is, you know, playing out in my own life, and then there's a part of it that is me kind of trying to, you know, reach back and figure out what it is that is going on.
mhm,
And you know, now that I'm talking about it, I think it's very much this thing that I was saying before. I think that, you know, I come from people that are very much interested in, you know, exploring things and and learning and moving and traveling, and there can be this very real tension, this very real pull between that and, you know, what it means to raise a family, and you know, how and why that's important. And I think that that thing um tugs at all of us.
mm. One of the things about this word repair that I feel like causes problems is, it's actually, so to like actually bust out the Hebrew,
Do it.
it's not a very well understood term, but the phrase is tikkun olam, which I think is a pretty well known
Mhm.
phrase. But
Mhm.
it's usually translated as repairing the world, which is
Mhm.
one way of understanding what the word olam means. But really, like biblically, that word has more to do with time than space. It's more like a eternity or forever uh,
Right.
type of word. And so, you know, on one level, like, yeah, cool. Jewish mysticism understands that space and time are a continuum, right? But I think that there's really a meaning of this phrase tikkun olam that is kind of a paradox, and which is meaning that like it's not a job. It's not like a repair. It's not fixing your sink, right? It's a
Mhm.
repair that never ends. It's a repair that goes on forever.
Mhm.
And I feel like the idea of repair, or to use the word that you use, which is healing, which I think is maybe more common in the broader sort of scenes that we're in as a word
Sure.
for this, I feel like that can be taken as like an objective,
Mhm.
as though there's an end point to it,
Right.
and then you're better now, right? Or the sink is fixed.
Right, right, and that's not really how it works.
Yeah. And you and one of the I mean to go astrological, uh repairs feel like a sixth house matter to me in a lot of ways, right?
Sure.
And so what I mean by that is they are a pain in the ass.
Mhm.
Generally, you want to be
Mhm.
done with them, and they're never ending. There's always another one to do, and I feel like you can't. Uh, and this is like a major householder problem too. It's just like there's always
There's always
something in the
something.
house, and you can't let like finishing the current thing be like such an important goal that you give up afterwards, that you use everything up. You have to stay in
Right,
repair mode.
right, like, getting used to the part of it that is, like, to the extent that things are repaired. I don't it's the thing that I notice with the kids is, like, as they are kind of growing and going through their development, it's, like, right when we get used to wherever they are is when the new thing starts.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I think it's very much, like that. It's just there is no end. I mean, that's that and I think that's the thing of tending,
Uh-huh.
um, to your family, tending to your ancestors, you know, um, it's not so much a transaction. Even and I think, like, sometimes it can be, you know, like, sometimes you're just like, "Hey, man, I need some help." And sometimes, and that's, in the spiritual world and in the mundane world, like, sometimes I've gotta call my dad and ask him for some cash, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, the yeah, there's something about the ongoing nature of it that I think is really beautiful and also maybe terrifying. I don't know. There's something about wanting to be um done. I mean, is the householder thing is is that thing of like, well, no, like, we're doing
Yeah.
it. um yeah, I was listening to the Justin Sledge from Esoterica's very long Kabbalah lectures, and he gets into Tikkun Olam
Mm-hmm.
and that thing of kind of right practice being the thing that does the repair, and that makes sense to me. um I find that maybe even more I find that maybe even helpful, just in terms of, I don't know, it's a thing of how you are doing things and not necessarily what you are accomplishing by doing them that makes the difference.